Part 1. Lena Carter arrived at the Marine base just after sunrise, when the air still felt cool and quiet. She stepped out of the old car she had borrowed from a neighbor and took a deep breath. She had been to military bases before, but it had been a long time. Too long, maybe. The last time she walked through a checkpoint like this, she was the one being escorted through dust and chaos, not silence and early morning calm. She straightened her backpack strap, held her ID in her hand, and walked toward the gate. A line of vehicles moved slowly through the main lane, but the pedestrian checkpoint was nearly empty. Only one officer stood there, leaning slightly against the booth as if he had been bored for the last hour. He looked young, maybe younger than her, but he wore the confidence of someone who believed nothing could surprise him. When she reached him, she offered a small polite smile. "Morning. I'm here to visit my brother. He's in the medical wing." The officer took her ID with a quick motion, barely glancing at her. She could already sense the shift in his posture, the faint tightening of his shoulders. He looked at her picture, then at her face and then back again. His expression slowly changed into one of amused disbelief. He snickered, not loudly, but enough for Lena to hear it clearly. "This your ID?" he asked. Lena kept her tone steady. "Yes." He raised an eyebrow, still smirking. "You sure?" She didn't react. She had learned a long time ago that reacting only made things worse. People who underestimated her loved to push for some kind of emotion, anger, fear, shame. When she stayed quiet, it usually confused them. The officer held her ID up to the light and shook his head as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "You don't look old enough to have this clearance," he said, "or to be connected to anyone inside this base. You sure you're not using someone else's card?" He sounded half joking, half suspicious. Lena simply answered, "It's mine." She could feel the cool air shift as another Marine walked by behind her, but nobody stopped to help or interfere. The officer seemed perfectly comfortable mocking her in front of others. "How'd you even get this?" he said, flipping the ID over. "You work with some volunteer group or something?" She stayed calm. "I'm here to see my brother. He's been moved to the medical wing. They approved the visit yesterday." The officer made no effort to hide the way he looked her up and down. Her clothes were simple, plain jeans, a loose shirt, and a worn jacket. She didn't look like someone with a high-level clearance or someone with military ties. To him, she probably looked like someone who got lost on the way to a grocery store. "Look," he said, leaning against the booth again. "We get people trying to get in all the time. Some fake badges, some borrowed IDs, some think we're too busy to check closely. But this," he tapped her ID with his finger, "this doesn't match you." Lena didn't sigh or frown. She simply waited. "What's in the case?" he added, pointing to the small metal case she held. "Medical tools," she replied. His eyes narrowed. "For what? You some kind of nurse?" She shook her head slightly. "No. Paramedic." "No. Then what?" She hesitated, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she didn't want to say it. She didn't like explaining things to people who had already decided she was suspicious. And she didn't owe him an explanation. "It's personal equipment," she finally said. "I was told I could bring it." He rolled his eyes and crossed his arms. "Okay. Now you're just making it sound more suspicious." Lena remained steady. She had dealt with tougher officers than him. She had been questioned in tents in foreign deserts, in muddy outposts, in noisy airfields. But this was different. Those places had been about danger. This was about dismissal. This was about a young man who thought she was too ordinary to be anything important. He scanned her ID again, slower this time. Then he tapped on the small screen inside the booth and typed something. Lena waited quietly. "Who approved your visit?" he asked. "Lieutenant Harris from the medical wing," she said. He paused his typing. "And how do you know a lieutenant?" Lena didn't like the tone in his voice, so she simply said, "He contacted me when my brother was admitted." The officer snickered again, a short, sharp sound. "Right?" He kept typing, glancing at her ID and then at her again. A minute passed, then another. The sun rose a little higher, warming the pavement under her feet. Finally, he leaned out of the booth. You know, none of this makes sense. You show up alone, carrying some strange metal case, with an ID that doesn't match your appearance, and you expect me to just let you in. Aina didn't move. I'm not asking you to break rules. I'm asking you to check my clearance properly. He didn't like that. She could see it in the way he stood a bit straighter, the way his jaw tightened. Challenging his competence, even politely, hit his ego. You know what? He said. I'm going to need to verify this with someone higher up. That's fine, Lena replied calmly. He grabbed the radio clipped to his vest. Control, this is Gate 6. I need verification on a visitor with an ID that looks questionable. I'm holding her here for now. His words were chosen on purpose. He wanted her to hear them. Questionable. Holding her. Like she was some kind of intruder. Lena didn't take it personally. She had experienced worse. He waited for a voice to reply, tapping the edge of her ID card lightly against the booth. His tapping sounded impatient, even irritated. So, he said after a moment, what do you actually do? Since you're not a nurse, not a paramedic, and apparently not someone with a believable ID. Lena looked at him quietly. I don't think that matters right now. He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. People who hide details usually have something to hide. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The officer studied her again, this time with a mix of suspicion and challenge, like he was trying to decide if he should push harder. He was used to authority, used to people obeying, used to people getting nervous under pressure. Lena didn't give him any of that. The radio crackled. But before anyone responded, another Marine walked by, the kind who looked like he'd been through more than a few deployments. He glanced at Lena, then at the ID in the officer's hand. He didn't say anything, but his eyes lingered on the metal case she carried. Something about it made his expression change for a split second, but then he kept walking. The officer didn't notice. He was too focused on proving he was right. You know, he said, people lie to me all the time. They come in here with big stories, fake approvals, and excuses. But I can tell you right now, your story doesn't add up. Lena kept her voice soft. I'm not lying, he scoffed. Everyone says that. There was nothing for her to say. The officer had already built a picture of her in his mind. Simple, harmless, suspicious just because she didn't look impressive. She had no rank insignia, no uniform, no visible authority. She just looked like a quiet woman with tired eyes and a metal case. Another Marine vehicle drove through the adjacent lane, and a couple of soldiers glanced at the scene curiously. It wasn't every day someone got stuck at the pedestrian gate. Lena could feel their eyes on her, but she kept her gaze steady on the officer. Finally, the radio crackled again. Gate 6, this is Control. Verification in progress. Stand by. The officer sighed loudly as if this process was a burden. He looked at her again. You really think this is going to work out for you? I do, Lena said simply. He clicked his tongue and leaned against the booth again, acting like he was waiting for a show to finish. She stood silently, the metal case in her hand reflecting a bit of sunlight. Inside it were items she had carried for years, items she hoped she would not need today, but brought anyway. Not because they were dangerous, but because they were precious. The officer glanced once more at her ID, shaking his head again, still convinced she didn't belong. But in just a few minutes, everything about his assumptions would fall apart. And Red Needle would be the reason why. Part 2. The quiet morning around the gate slowly shifted as more vehicles arrived, engines humming softly in the background. But Lena stayed where she was, standing still on the warm pavement, hands relaxed at her sides, the small metal case resting against her leg. She didn't look nervous or annoyed. She simply looked like someone who had learned how to wait. The officer, however, looked the opposite. Restless, irritated, and almost eager to find something wrong. He kept staring at the screen inside the booth, tapping the edge of her ID against the table, glancing at her every few seconds as if expecting her to slip up. He was young, but not inexperienced. His uniform was clean and fitted, his boots polished, and he held himself with the stiff confidence of someone who took pride in rules. But pride had a way of turning into arrogance, and arrogance had a way of clouding judgment. He finally leaned his elbow on the counter and looked at her again with that same doubtful smirk. "You know," he said, "most visitors at least try to look the part. They come in dressed sharp, carrying documents, walking like they belong here. But you don't even seem worried." Lena met his eyes, calm as ever. "Why should I be worried?" He shrugged. "Because this is a Marine Corps base. We don't just let anyone walk in. And right now, you look like someone who wandered in by mistake." Lena didn't answer. She had nothing to prove to him. The more she stayed quiet, the more it unsettled him. He tapped her ID again. "So, your brother, he's in the medical wing?" "Yes." "And what's his name?" She told him. He typed it into the system. Then he typed something else. Then he frowned. "There's no record of your name linked to his file," he said, sounding triumphant, as if he had caught her. She didn't react. "There wouldn't be." "Why not?" "Because they don't keep personal connections in those files unless it's necessary." He leaned back, crossing his arms again. "Or because you're lying." Lena didn't blink. "I'm not." He huffed out a breath, almost laughing. "You really stick to the same answers, don't you?" "Only when they're true," she replied softly. The officer paused, maybe surprised she spoke back at all. But the surprise lasted only a moment before annoyance returned. "Okay then," he said. "If everything you're saying is true, you won't mind if we run a deeper check." "I don't mind." He expected her to flinch. She didn't. He keyed in another request, this one taking longer. The screen flashed several times, and a loading icon appeared. The system was pulling up a more detailed verification, something that normally wasn't needed for regular visitors. He exhaled sharply. "This is going to take a while." "That's all right," she said. He looked at her again, puzzled by her patience. "You always this calm?" She thought for a moment. "I try to be. Most people get nervous when they're caught doing something suspicious. I'm not doing anything suspicious." He rolled his eyes and looked back at the screen. "We'll see." A moment passed, then 2, then 3. Lena shifted slightly to give her legs a rest, but she remained composed. She could sense other Marines glancing her way, noticing the tense atmosphere at the usually quiet pedestrian gate. One Marine stood a few feet away waiting for a ride. He casually glanced at her case again, the same metal case the older Marine had stared at earlier. But again he said nothing. The officer finally pushed away from the counter and stepped out of the booth. "What kind of medical tools are in that case?" he asked. "Equipment I've kept from my past work." "Past work doing what?" She didn't answer right away. She wasn't hiding anything wrong, just something complicated. "I used to assist in emergency field response," she said carefully. He tilted his head. "Like an EMT?" "No." "Combat medic?" "No." He folded his arms tighter. "Then what?" She looked at him with a calm expression, but her voice stayed steady. "It's not something I discuss unless necessary." He barked out a laugh. "That's convenient." Lena lowered her gaze slightly. She could feel herself growing tired, not physically but mentally. Tired of being doubted. Tired of being judged by appearances. Tired of dealing with people who mistook quiet for weakness. But she wasn't angry. She just wanted to see her brother. She lifted the case slightly so it didn't rest too heavily in her hand. "It's nothing dangerous," she said. "Nothing harmful." He raised an eyebrow. "That's exactly what someone carrying something suspicious would say." Before she could reply, the radio on his vest crackled again. He quickly reached for it. "Gate 6 here. Go ahead." A voice spoke, muffled but firm. Lena couldn't hear the words clearly, but she caught the tone. Serious, urgent. The officer's eyebrows pulled together as he listened. "Repeat that," he said into the radio. Another message came. This time, Lena caught a few words: long clearance, flagged, and pending confirmation. The officer's face shifted from smug confidence to mild confusion. "What does that mean?" he muttered under his breath. He stepped back into the booth, pulled the door closed behind him, and leaned closer to the screen. Lena stayed outside, her heart steady but her thoughts slowly tightening with caution. She didn't fear being denied entry. She feared the attention it might draw if her clearance was fully revealed. She didn't want to become a topic of discussion here. She didn't want whispers or questions or stares. She just wanted to visit her brother. Inside the booth, the officer's expression shifted again, this time turning more serious. He looked at the screen as if reading something unexpected. Then he opened the radio again. "Control, this is Gate 6. I need clarification. You're saying her clearance is... what level?" Lena didn't hear the full reply, but the officer's reaction was sharp. He stood very still for a moment. Then he turned, looked at her through the booth window, and narrowed his eyes. Not with suspicion this time, but with confusion. He stepped out again. "Where exactly did you say you used to work?" he asked, his tone no longer cocky. Lena kept her voice calm. "I didn't say." His mouth tightened. "Well, maybe you should." She didn't answer. He took a slow breath, then walked around her, studying the case again. "That symbol," he said quietly. "It's familiar. I've seen it somewhere." His voice had changed, still unsure, but no longer mocking. Lena didn't respond. She didn't want to point out what it was. Not yet. The officer faced her again. "Look, I'm trying to understand here. Your clearance level doesn't match what I'm seeing. It's higher than expected. Way higher. And I don't know why someone like you would have it." Lena held her breath for a moment. This was exactly what she didn't want. "I'm just here for my brother," she said softly. "Yeah, well, this is becoming bigger than that," he replied. He wasn't rude now, just unsettled. He stepped back toward the booth, then paused. "Wait here. Don't go anywhere." As if she had any intention of leaving. He closed the booth door again, talking quietly into the radio. His voice was lower this time, and she couldn't make out more than a few scattered words. Classified, verification, cross-check, not matching entry appearance. She knew what that meant. Her past was starting to surface. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. She had hoped today would be simple. Visit her brother, give him the things he asked for, talk to him for an hour, then leave quietly. But nothing about her life ever stayed simple. Behind her, two Marines walked by in conversation, but they lowered their voices when they noticed the tension. One of them glanced at her case again, the same curious glance she had noticed before. People were starting to wonder. Finally, the officer came out again. His posture had changed. His expression had changed. Even the way he held her ID had changed. No longer loosely or dismissively, but carefully. "Control says they're calling someone from the higher office," he said. Lena felt her stomach settle in a strange way. "I see. They said your clearance isn't wrong," he continued, trying to understand it himself. "It's old but valid, and it's special. I don't know how you have it, but..." He stopped. His eyes drifted again to the symbol on her metal case. Recognition flickered, and slowly, realization started forming in his expression. But he wasn't ready to believe it. Not yet. "Look," he said softer than before. "I need to ask something, and I need you to be honest." Lena waited. He pointed at the case. "That mark, is it connected to a field unit? An emergency response group?" She didn't answer right away. He stepped a little closer. "Is it connected to something called..." He hesitated, trying to recall the name. "Red? Something? Red Team? Red Cross?" Lena said nothing. He searched her eyes carefully. "Red? Needle?" His voice softened, almost uncertain. Lena didn't confirm it. She didn't have to. He saw the answer in her silence. And in that moment, everything changed. Part 3. The air around the gate suddenly felt heavier, almost as if the space itself knew something important had been revealed. The officer who had been so confident just minutes earlier now stood strangely still, staring at Lena with a different expression. Not mockery, not suspicion, something closer to disbelief. He looked from her face to the metal case again, focusing on the small symbol etched onto its surface. It was faint, worn from years of handling, but still clear enough to recognize if someone had ever seen it before. And he clearly had. He swallowed hard, his voice quieter than before. Red needle. That's not something regular people know about. Lena didn't nod. She didn't speak. Her silence said enough. The officer stepped back, almost unconsciously, as if the space between them had changed. His stance shifted, not in fear, but in respect he didn't know how to show yet. I thought red needle was some rumor, he muttered half to himself. Something instructors talked about to scare recruits. A team that shows up in the middle of nowhere, fixes things nobody else can, and leaves without being noticed. Lena lowered her gaze. It's not a rumor. He let out a shaky breath, rubbing a hand across the back of his neck. But red needle units were classified, and no one ever met them. They were ghosts. Lena stayed calm. That's how it was supposed to be. The officer looked at her again, this time studying her with fresh eyes. Not as an outsider, not as a suspicious visitor, but as someone who might have a past far deeper than he had ever imagined. Another Marine approached the gate, walking briskly, but slowed down when he saw the tension. He glanced between Lena and the officer, sensing that something had changed. Everything all right here? He asked. The officer didn't answer right away. He looked uncertain, like he wasn't sure if he should explain what he had just learned. He finally said, Control is doing another check. The other Marine nodded and continued on, but not without one last curious glance at Lena. Word would spread soon. Even if nobody said anything directly, Marines were quick to pick up on unusual situations. The officer stepped aside, motioning for Lena to stand in a shaded area near the booth. You can wait over here, he said, his tone softer, almost apologetic. She nodded once and stepped over. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The base around them moved as usual, but a strange quiet filled their small space. The officer finally broke it. If you really were part of Red Needle, he said carefully, why would you stop? Why would you be here like this? Just visiting your brother like any regular person. Lena held the metal case gently, her fingers brushing over the worn edges. Because life changes, she said softly. Sometimes by choice, sometimes not. He hesitated before asking, did something happen? Lena didn't look at him. More than one thing. He nodded slowly, as if he understood she wouldn't say more, and she appreciated that he didn't push. Finally, he showed a bit of respect. Minutes passed. The officer kept checking the booth window, waiting for control to signal him. Every time a radio clicked somewhere nearby, he straightened a little, expecting the call. Lena waited quietly, her thoughts drifting back to the years she tried so hard to put behind her. The nights spent in temporary shelters. The missions that changed without warning. The moments when everything depended on seconds, on the steadiness of her hands, the focus in her mind, the trust others placed in her. Red Needle wasn't a unit people joined. It was a unit people survived. And she had survived long enough to leave. Finally, after what felt like a long silence, the officer's radio crackled again. He lifted it quickly. Gate 6. Go ahead. Lena watched his face as he listened. His eyes widened slightly. His lips parted a bit. His posture straightened. Whatever he was hearing was not what he expected. He lowered the radio slowly, as if absorbing the information. Then he turned toward her. They confirmed it, he said quietly. Her chest tightened slightly. I see. Your ID matches records that were sealed. They had to pull an old file out of archive security. The clearance level is... He trailed off, searching for words. Higher than my pay grade, that's for sure. Lena remained calm, but a flicker of discomfort crossed her heart. She didn't want those files touched. She didn't want people digging into what she once was. They're sending someone from the operations office to speak with you, he continued. That made her glance up. Why? Standard protocol when someone with your clearance shows up unannounced. He tried to give a reassuring look. It's not because of anything bad. They just need to confirm it's really you. She nodded. She expected this much. The officer shifted again, almost awkwardly. Listen about earlier. I shouldn't have. She cut him off gently. You were doing your job. He looked down. That doesn't excuse how I talk to you. Lena didn't answer. She didn't need to. Even if his tone had been disrespectful, she knew the difference between cruelty and ignorance. His was the second. A large truck rumbled past, its engine loud for a moment, breaking the quiet. When it rolled away, the officer spoke again. What exactly did Red Needle do? He asked. Lena didn't turn her head. We helped where help didn't reach fast enough. Like battlefield zones? She nodded once. But you weren't a combat medic? No. He scratched the back of his head. Then what were you? Lena hesitated, then said, someone who filled in the gaps when no one else could. He frowned slightly, trying to understand. And they trusted you with that level of responsibility? They had to, she said softly. There weren't many of us. The officer leaned against the booth, arms loosely at his sides now. I heard rumors that Red Needle worked in places even Marines avoided, that they got called in for impossible missions. Lena didn't react. She didn't confirm it, but her silence didn't deny it either. He exhaled slowly. And you're telling me someone like you, someone so quiet, was part of that? Her gaze softened. Quiet doesn't mean unprepared. He gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. I guess I judged you too quickly. Lena looked at him, not unkindly. People often do. Before the officer could respond, the sound of approaching boots came from the road. 2 Marines were heading toward the gate, one of them holding a folder and wearing an expression that suggested he was here with purpose. The officer straightened instantly. That must be them, he whispered. Lena took a quiet breath. The 2 Marines approached. The one in front looked experienced, older than most around the gate, with a steady posture and a sharp gaze. He stopped in front of Lena, studying her face for a moment. You're the one with the sealed clearance? He asked calmly. Lena nodded. He looked at the metal case in her hand next. His eyes lingered on the familiar symbol. Something flickered across his expression, recognition mixed with respect. May I see the case? He asked. Lena held it out, letting him look at the exterior but not open it. He traced the worn edges of the symbol with his eyes, then handed it back carefully, as if it were something fragile. He opened the folder he carried and glanced over the documents. Then he looked up at her. This clearance was issued a long time ago, he said, but it's still valid. You understand what this symbol means? She nodded. Yes. The Marine closed the folder and looked to the officer who had questioned her earlier. She's approved, he said. Grant her full entry. No restrictions. The officer blinked. All areas cleared? Even. All areas. The senior Marine repeated firmly. The younger officer swallowed and nodded. The senior Marine turned back to Lena. Your presence here is unusual. If you're here for personal reasons, we'll respect your privacy. But if you need assistance, we'll provide it. I'm only here to see my brother, she said. He nodded once. Then we'll make sure you reach him without delay. He stepped back. Welcome, ma'am. The title made her flinch slightly, not out of discomfort but out of memory. The officer who had mocked her earlier stood stiff, unsure what to say. Lena offered a small, gentle nod. The gate began to open, and as she stepped forward, sunlight glinted against the metal case in her hand. The same case that carried the symbol powerful enough to shift the entire tone of the morning. Red Needle, a name spoken in whispers, a team forgotten by many, but still remembered by those who had seen what they could do. And now, everyone at the gate knew one thing. Lena Carter had once been part of something extraordinary. Lena stood quietly as the energy around the gate shifted. Only minutes ago, she had been treated like someone who didn't belong here, someone who might even be causing trouble. Now the same people who looked at her with suspicion were stepping aside, lowering their voices, and watching her with new eyes. But Lena wasn't the type to enjoy attention. She kept her expression calm, not proud or angry, just steady. All she wanted was to get inside and see her brother. Nothing more. Officer Daniels cleared his throat and tried to speak, but the words tangled. He looked like someone who had just realized the ground beneath him wasn't solid. His earlier confidence had faded completely. Now he seemed nervous about even meeting her eyes. "Ma'am, I didn't know," he said softly. Lena gave him a small nod. "It's all right," she replied. "You were doing your job." But Daniel's body language showed he didn't agree. He knew the difference between doing his job and mocking someone. He knew he had crossed that line. The memory replayed in his head, the way he had laughed at her ID, the way he doubted every answer she gave, the way he looked at her like she didn't belong anywhere near this place. Now he had learned who she really was, or at least enough to understand he had made a mistake. As Lena stepped forward, the senior medic who recognized the red needle emblem walked with her. His steps were quiet, almost respectful. "It's been years since I last saw someone from your unit," he said. "Didn't think any of you would come through a base gate this casually." Lena smiled softly. "I'm not here for anything official," she said. "Just visiting my brother." "Still," he replied, "it's an honor." She didn't respond to that. Instead, she looked back, noticing Daniel still standing stiffly at the gate, watching her walk away. His shoulders were tense, and he seemed unsure if he should call out to her again or just stay silent. She turned her head just enough so he could hear her voice. "Take care of yourself," she said gently. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a lecture. It was simply kindness. Kindness from someone he had misjudged. The words seemed to hit him harder than any reprimand. As they approached the inner area of the base, Lena's footsteps slowed. She wasn't nervous, but her heart felt heavier. The closer she got to the medical wing, the more real everything became. Her brother's injury, the reason she had traveled so far. The medic walked a few steps ahead but slowed when he noticed her quietness. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, though she didn't speak. The halls they entered were quieter, filled with the faint smell of disinfectant and the soft hum of machines. For Lena, these sounds weren't unfamiliar. They reminded her of field tents, emergency stations, nights spent awake with wounded soldiers who were counting on her steady hands. She never forgot a face she treated. But she carried those memories silently, never telling anyone, not even her family. Her life in Red Needle had been confidential. Her service had been necessary but invisible. Maybe that's why Daniel's laughter earlier didn't sting as deeply as it might have for someone else. She had grown used to being unseen. A nurse at the desk noticed her and stood up immediately. "You must be here for the Marine who came in 2 days ago," she said warmly. Lena nodded. "Yes, I'm his sister." The nurse's expression softened. "He's been asking for you since this morning." Lena's chest tightened with relief. She followed the nurse down a short hall, and when they reached the door, the nurse quietly slipped away. Inside, the room was still. Her brother lay on the bed, bandaged along one arm and part of his shoulder. His eyes were half open, tired but alert. When he saw her, his face lit up. "You made it," he whispered. Lena stepped closer, her voice breaking into a gentle laugh. "Of course I did. You think I'd stay away?" He slowly pushed himself up, wincing a little but smiling anyway. "I'm fine. Just a small accident." Lena raised an eyebrow. "They don't bring you to a medical wing like this for a small accident." Her brother tried to look casual, but his eyes softened when she sat down beside him. "I didn't want you to worry," he said. "I worry anyway," she replied. There was a small silence, the kind that held more emotion than words. Her brother reached out with his uninjured hand and squeezed her fingers. "You're here now. That's enough for me." Lena nodded, though her heart was still heavy. She had seen so many people in beds like this during her service. Some healed, some didn't. She reminded herself he was stable. He was safe. This wasn't a battlefield. But old memories had a way of resurfacing at the worst moments. "What happened?" she asked quietly. He explained the training accident, how a piece of equipment malfunctioned. The story was simple, almost ordinary, but the fear he must have felt was hidden between his words. Lena listened carefully, not interrupting. When he finished, he smiled again. "You didn't have to rush here like this. You could have waited." Lena shook her head. "No. If something happens to you, I'll be there. Always." For a moment, they simply sat together in silence, the kind of silence only family can share. A silence full of care, worry, and love. Back at the gate, Daniels was still staring at the path Lena had taken. The others around him had gone back to their duties, but he couldn't shake what happened. The symbol on her case, those two simple words, red needle, kept replaying in his head. He had grown up hearing stories of mysterious units, the kind of people who showed up in the worst conditions, doing things ordinary soldiers couldn't talk about. But he never believed he would meet one of them. And certainly not someone who walked up dressed like any other civilian, holding an ID he thought was fake. His pride stung. Not because she outranked him, but because she had treated him with more respect than he had shown her. One of the younger Marines approached him. "Sir, you good?" Daniels nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking." The Marine shrugged and walked off, but Daniels stayed still. A part of him wanted to run after Lena and apologize again, properly this time. But another part of him knew her kindness at the end had been enough. She didn't seem like someone who wanted attention or apologies. She just wanted peace. He hoped she found it inside those walls. In the medical room, Lena finally relaxed a little. Her brother talked about base life, about his friends, about how the training days were long but worth it. She listened with a soft smile, grateful to hear his voice steady and warm. Then he paused and squinted at her. "You look tired," he said. Lena laughed lightly. "Long trip." He nodded slowly, though he kept watching her with curiosity. "You always show up right when I need you," he said. "You've always been like that." She squeezed his hand again. "Someone has to make sure you stay in one piece," she replied. He chuckled, then winced at the pain. Lena placed her other hand gently on his arm. "It'll heal. Just give it time." "Yeah," he replied softly, but there was something else in his eyes. A question he didn't ask out loud. A feeling he couldn't explain. He always knew his sister was strong, steady, different from other people. But he never knew how deep her strength went. And she never told him. Maybe one day, she thought. But not today. Today was about him. She would stay with him as long as he needed. And outside, Daniels would continue thinking about the woman he misjudged. The woman who carried a story he may never fully understand. Lena didn't want anyone to be shocked by her past. But sometimes the truth had a way of revealing itself on its own. And the red needle emblem had done exactly that. The room grew quieter as the afternoon light softened through the blinds. Lena sat beside her brother, watching the slow rise and fall of his breathing as he rested. For the first time since she arrived, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease a little. He was safe. He was healing. That was all she needed to know. But even with the calm settling in, her thoughts wandered. She remembered the gate, the long walk through the base, the way people had looked at the red needle emblem once they recognized it. She wished it hadn't drawn so much attention. She had spent years working silently, stepping in when things were dangerous, stepping out before anyone even learned her name. She liked it that way. Her brother stirred slightly and opened his eyes again. "You're thinking too hard," he murmured. Lena let out a soft breath. "Just checking on you." He gave her a tired smile. "I'm okay. Really. I'm tougher than I look." She smirked gently. "We'll see about that." He shifted a little in the bed, trying to get comfortable. Then he looked around the room and back at her. "They've been treating me well here," he said. "The nurses come in every hour. The medics check everything twice. I've made a couple friends too." "I'm glad," Lena replied. "You deserve that kind of care." He stared at her for a moment, studying her face. "You always talk like you've seen too much." Lena didn't look away, but she didn't explain either. "You're my brother," she said. "Of course I worry." He nodded slowly as if accepting that answer, even though he sensed there was more beneath it. A knock at the door interrupted the quiet moment. The medic who escorted Lena earlier stepped inside. His face carried a thoughtful expression. "Sorry to interrupt," he said gently. "Just checking on the patient." Her brother gave a small wave. "Doing all right." The medic did a quick review of the equipment, making sure everything was in order. When he finished, he turned to Lena. "If you need anything, let us know." You're welcome here anytime. Lena nodded politely. Thank you for being so kind. He smiled as if wanting to say more, but he left quietly, keeping the room peaceful. When the door closed, her brother turned to her with raised eyebrows. They're all acting like you're someone important, he said. Lena shrugged lightly. People make assumptions. Bad assumptions or good ones? He asked. She looked into his eyes, then gave a small smile. Doesn't matter. But he could tell she didn't want to talk about it. So he let it go. As the hours passed, Lena helped him sit up, walked him slowly around the room to stretch his legs, and made sure he took his medicine on time. It reminded her of when they were younger, when she would guide him home after he scraped his knee, or when she carried his backpack on days he felt tired. Some things never changed. You always look out for me, he said softly. Lena chuckled. Someone has to. He leaned back in bed, gazing at her with admiration. I want to be like you someday. Her eyes softened. Just be yourself. That's enough. But he shook his head. You're strong. Calm. You don't let anything scare you. Lena didn't respond for a moment. Instead, she looked down at her hands. I'm scared sometimes, she said quietly. He blinked, surprised. You? Of what? Losing people I care about. Her brother swallowed. Even though she spoke softly, the weight of her words was clear. You won't lose me, he whispered. Lena hoped he was right. As evening approached, the nurse returned with a tray of food. Her brother tried to pretend the hospital meal tasted fine, but Lena's amused expression told him she wasn't fooled. You don't have to act tough, she teased. I'm not acting, he insisted, even though the taste on his face said otherwise. She laughed quietly, and for the first time that day her laughter sounded light. After he finished eating, she helped him sit comfortably again. He watched her with gentle eyes. You know, he said, every time you visit, something feels easier. Lena shook her head. I don't do anything. You do, he insisted. Just being here, it helps. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Then I'll stay as long as you want. I don't want you to leave at all, he replied honestly. She smiled warmly. I won't, not for a while. Meanwhile, at the gate, Daniels was going through the end-of-day checks with a distracted mind. He kept replaying the moment the medic recognized the red needle emblem, the sudden shift from mocking disbelief to stunned silence. One of the other guards nudged him lightly. You've been quiet all afternoon. Daniels sighed. Made a mistake earlier. Big one. Daniels nodded. Yeah, big. The guard didn't press. Sometimes a person had to sit with their own lessons. Daniels looked toward the direction Lena had walked hours ago. I judged her too quickly, he finally said. Didn't even take a second to think before laughing. The guard nodded slowly. Happens to the best of us. The important part is you learn something. Daniels didn't respond. He was still thinking about her calm expression, the way she treated him with respect even after everything. He hoped she knew he truly regretted it. Back in the medical room, Lena felt her brother drift into sleep again. His breathing became steady, peaceful. She stayed in her chair, not wanting to disturb him. Outside the door, the hallway lights dimmed, signaling quiet hours. The base had its own rhythm. Busy in the morning, steady in the afternoon, and almost silent at night. Lena leaned back slightly, her eyes drifting to the case she had placed beside her chair. The red needle emblem was visible even in the dim light, simple, small, but powerful to those who knew its meaning. She wondered what her brother would think if he ever learned the full story behind it. She wondered if the base would treat her differently tomorrow. She wondered if Daniels had finally stopped replaying everything in his mind. But she didn't want anyone to be in awe of her. She didn't want her past to cast a shadow over quiet moments like this. She just wanted to be a sister today. A nurse peeked in softly. You need anything? She whispered. Lena shook her head. I'm good. Thank you. The nurse smiled kindly and stepped back out. Lena glanced at her brother again. She pulled her chair closer, resting her arms gently along the bed's edge. You're stronger than you think, she whispered to him, even though he was asleep. Her heart settled as she watched him rest. She felt grateful, grateful that he was alive, grateful that she could be here, grateful that the long journey had led her to this moment. Whatever people thought about her past didn't matter. What mattered was family. What mattered was being present. And as the night deepened, Lena stayed there quietly, keeping watch the same way she used to on long nights in distant places. But here there was no danger, no noise, no fear, just peace. And sometimes, peace was the greatest gift she could ever ask for.